Hello and welcome to TelecomTV. I'm Martin Warwick. We're here in The Hague in the Netherlands at the SDN and NFV World Congress 2017. We've got a panel discussion here with four very able and knowledgeable contestants, as it might like to say. And the subject of this piece is NFV 5 years. That's not a lot, or is it? And to discuss this with me is, on my far left there, is Eric Vallone, who is Director of Product Management Service Provider Solutions at Dell EMC. Eric, welcome.
Welcome, thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Next to him, an old friend, Francisco Javier Ramon Salguero, Head of Virtualization Telefonica. Great to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Great.
On my far right is Eric Debeau, who is Head of R&D
Team.
There we are, thank you, I couldn't remember it, at Orange. And then next to me on my immediate right is Saurabh Sandhir, VP Product Management Team, Nuage Networks.
I'm happy to be here.
Pleased you are. Let's get into this, and let's begin. I'm going to ask you, Eric. Eric on my right hand side, we've got two Erics here. It's almost exactly 5 years now since the release of the first white paper on NFV. Do you think this first 5 years have lived up to expectations? Where are the CSPs in terms of deployment of SDN and NFV in their networks?
Yes, so thank you for inviting me. We also was at the origin of the white paper with Orange 5 years ago. I think we expected maybe much more on cost reduction at the beginning and so on. So today it's not maybe the major driver, but I think we progressed quite a lot because it's a big transformation towards software and so on. And we started the journey in Orange. Started with OBS, our arm for the business market. So we launched some EasyGo service last year with big enterprise customer at the international level. So using some kind of SDN on let's say small VNF. So it's working, it's orchestrated and so on. We did a lot of work also to understand all this NFVI stuff, how to integrate the Vim with SDN controller. So it was a hard work, and now it's quite okay. And we have defined our let's say reference infrastructure. And now we are in a phase to deploy all this reference infrastructure in our various countries in Europe and also in Africa. So we will deploy this infrastructure. On the top of this infrastructure, we'll deploy some VNF from vendors, but we want to avoid to have this kind of silo from a vendor providing all the stack. So it was a big challenge at the beginning of SDN NFV. I remember 3 years ago when I attended the SDN World Congress, we had some POC from various use cases, and every POC had its own stack. So I think we did some quite good progress on that now. We are able to provide a common infrastructure, and we can put a lot of VNF on top of it. And that at the end of the day, maybe in 2-3 years, we can see the benefits in terms of cost, in terms of agility of SDN NFV. So I think we are quite well in advance in the journey. We knew that it should take time, but 5 years is not so much. And I think we are quite happy with the journey today.
Francisco, Telefonica, what's the viewpoint from Telefonica?
Well, at least I'll share mine. But I'll share my particular one because I you know what, I was part of the drafting team of that original white paper. So, yes, and actually, I mean, one of the feelings there was when we'll get down to business very quickly, as quickly as possible. We thought that the subjects to talk about were about automating, about doing things at scale at that moment in time. About transferring skills, all that was in the white paper. If you look back to that one, say, oh, probably these guys were not anticipating the future, but that was our key concern at that moment. And at the same time, what we saw is that there were some technological hurdles, some gaps that we all were aware of, so we enumerated them. And And the feeling was that, okay, these are technical gaps, so probably they will be out of the way in 1 year or two, and then we'll get down to business. Probably it's taking more. But the thing is that now we are entering in that stage where you are enabling the layers bottom up, and you know that now you can trust on that infrastructure. Always you can have room for improvement, of course, that all the hypervisor technologies are more suited for NFV workloads. You are having now the beams that are getting adapted to that environment. The combination with the SDN now makes sense somehow, so you can handle it. And now we are getting to the point where we are entering the automation. And now it's the meat of what that white paper was about, because we have been moving from the, with a focus on cost reduction sort of, because you are separating the software from the hardware, and that's good apparently for competition, but that does not come immediately. It's not an automatic process that you simply separate the components and immediately you create competition in one of them. It's more complicated than that. You need to create the market first, right? And now we are shifting from that naive view on just let's separate things, and now say, okay, once that they are separated, how we put them together again, but in a platform. And that is it's the core debate that you are hearing now in these conferences now. And how do I put the pieces together? Because now we are not talking about whether these technologies are feasible. We are no one questions that. We are talking about whether the components can work together and you can create a POC. It's not about that. It's about how can I make business out of this in a manner that is more convenient than the way of operating that I knew before. And that is precisely the challenge that we are embracing in Telefonica. So we've been following a bottom-up approach here to discover any gaps that were in the underlay layers, while getting ready for the real step that is doing it at large. It's the challenge that where we are now.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on. We are 5 years in, as we've said. Most this industry is infamous or well known or noted for the fact that the average sort of life cycle expectancy of a project or a technology is about 10, 15 years. The expectation with NFV seems to have been the original that it would be a flash, not a flash in the pan, but a very quick effort. And there's been talk over the past, sort of trough of disillusionment a bit, if you like. In the past couple of years, people have said, well, it's not really gone as fast as we thought it would. And we're 5 years in. 5 years is halfway to 10 years. And that seems to me to be what will happen. Eric, what do you make of the fact that, are there barriers to progress for NFV? If so, why and what are they? Are they financial? Are they cultural? Are they technical, or what?
Can I say yes?
To all of them, you can?
Yeah, to each and every one of them. If you go off and you look at it, there have been so many different barriers to making this thing happen. One of them is, if you look at a lot of the earlier solutions, they were one of two. They were either extremely restrictive, siloed, as you mentioned, full stack solutions, or they were just completely do-it-yourself, right? Here, have it. Go figure it out. No, it's easy. Don't worry about it. You're good to go. And people didn't have the knowledge. They didn't have the engineering budgets to be able to do it. They didn't understand the full complexity of that. That, and well, how do we take this and integrate it into our legacy environments, right? What do we make of this thing? We still have these services that we need to deal with, these legacy services. How are we going to integrate that into our environments? How are we going to automate it? How are we going to troubleshoot it? The cost, don't get me going about the cost of it. It's just huge.
Okay, that's the problem. What's the remedy? Saurabh, what do you think?
The remedy, first of all, I agree with all the panelists in terms of the progress we have made. It's hard to undermine that as we talk about a 10-year or a 5-year fixed lifespan, but we have made a lot of progress. Like my fellow panelists were saying, the white paper was actually ahead of its time, but the first meeting we had on HCNFV, it was in south of France, in Sofia and Antipolis. I remember January 2013. Some of the ideas there were so naive. People were talking about fresh hypervisors for telco clouds, and we need specialized hardware. So the progress we have been made, let's not undermine that. But path forward, one of the things, at least learning for us in Nuage and from my standpoint, has been the role SDN has to play alongside NFV. To me, that's for the lack of a better word, it's like peanut butter and jelly. It's better together, and they go well together. And the reason I say that is, if you look at the original HC NFV architecture, you had a big block for the orchestrator, the VNFM, but there was this little thing called the VIM, the virtual infrastructure manager, and an even smaller one, the NFVI, or the infrastructure. And SDN was supposed to be in there. And one of the learnings has been that SDN has a big role to play in terms of the automation of the infrastructure itself, in terms of providing routing capabilities, in terms of service chaining and connectivity to the WAN. And that, as SDN has matured during these 5 years, and of course there have been other trends, as Eric was mentioning earlier, in terms of moving from silos to a more horizontally integratable solution. I think we are at the cusp of deployments, and we are finally at a point where we are beginning to see these mass deployments. It's not a storm, but it's certainly more than a trickle.
So, do you think then that SDN has been not sidelined, but to some extent ignored? My view on this, when I first heard about NFV and its relationship with SDN, there was something like parallel railway tracks in reach infinity.
Yes.
They're very close, but they seem to be very close, but they're separate. Do you think that message is understood, and is it now well known that NFV really, to work properly, is predicated on SDN as well?
I think you have a great analogy there in terms of parallel tracks. Yes, there are parallel tracks, but for train to move, you need both tracks, even though. So there you go. I think that as people get into deployment, absolutely there is an understanding that you need that degree of automation and centralized control, as you were talking about all the trends around DevOps and so on. How you deliver them, SDN becomes a vehicle to provide all of that. And of course, there's the element of, if you go down one layer in terms of routing, in terms of service chaining, and last but not the least, connectivity to the WAN itself. Because one of the things has been that the telco cloud or the NFV environment is not just distributed into a centralized data center to a point of presence, but also at the WAN edge itself, all the way to the CPE. And SDN, a centralized control management plane for the network, becomes a way to stitch all of it together, and you realize it as soon as you get into a deployment.
Thank you. Okay, now let's look at something else, which is money, profitability. Originally, and I've seen this, I've been following this very, very closely for the past 5 years. SDN was sold, in inverted commas, on the basis of saving CSP costs, right? CapEx and OpEx.
Yep.
Now, that's fine, but you can't make a fortune from saving costs.
Yep.
You can make a fortune from introducing new services and making more money.
Right.
When are we going to get to the stage, do you think, Eric, you look as though you're keen to answer this one, when are we going to get to the stage where we know that there was money to be made from this? And it's not just a matter of cheese pairing and saving costs, it's a matter of expanding and making more.
I think we're there now, right? I think we're at the point where we've realized that, as you say, it's not about saving money. There's not business to be made to saving money. We all want to save money, but if we don't have the opportunity to increase our revenue, then by creating new services, by giving us more flexibility, I mean that's the promise of this whole thing, is the flexibility and the agility to be able to create new services. And with general purpose compute and the advances that we're seeing in the industry now, has gotten us to the point where, we can add new services on the fly. We can, create those new revenue generating opportunities. So I believe we're there now.
Okay, good. It's amazing, we're running out of time very rapidly, but we'll bang another question in anyway. So the end goal for CSPs, in addition to making money as far as the digital transformation is concerned, is what? What is the end goal? Is it this, not mythical, because it probably will arrive, but this new network, this transformed network, which it doesn't matter whether it's 5G, it doesn't matter whether it's cellular, it doesn't matter whether it's fixed, it doesn't matter what technology is carrying the signal, that's there with AI and with machine learning and automation and cloudification all involved. How far are we away from something like that? Does anybody have any idea what it will look like and how it's going to be monetized properly? It's a big question, but what
Well,
do you
actually,
think?
there's 3 questions in one. At
Yeah, I
least.
know. That's what I did.
Did you keep up with that?
Yeah, but I can try with at least 1 or 2.
Yeah.
No, I think that we are not that far, depending on how brave you are. I mean, as long as you are, I mean, if I had to summarize the goal of this, I mean, it's like being able to do things at scale, and that means treating things that are similar in a similar manner, but looks equal to you. Why? Because that's the path for several things. One is obviously for having interchangeable components that you can feel that you can replace for the best in breed. That is very important in some of the markets. But also that you can, if it's effortless to introduce new services, or could be almost effortless. In an environment like that you can feel free to try. And if it does not work, pivot. Because the cost is not varied. And that is super important in a situation where you have that big capillarity. If you have the infrastructure there and it's for a specific purpose, either you are right in what you are betting, or it would be a disaster. I mean, and so we are, in that aspect, what we are expecting it would be easy to have the capacity and allocate the capacity as we need in real time for whichever new service that we want to launch. And we can pre-test it and bring it as it is in the exact location where we need to test it.
So our objective is clearly to help our customers, to make them happy. So I think also in the past we were managing the network like boxes and like pets, like said Wendy this afternoon. Now we have to change our mind. We need to have the customer in mind and to have all our efforts towards the customer on how he experiences his services and so on. So we believe that let's say machine learning, intelligence artificial can help to predict some let's say some problems that can face a customer. So that's something we are working on today. So we not with as the NFV, I mean, just collecting some data, trying to analyze this data, correlating from some data coming from props, from radio access part, from let's say from SMC and so on. So we are doing that today. It's true that we in this conference we heard a lot about automation, machine learning, and so on. So, but we have to be careful because to be able to do that, we need to capture all the data from the VNF, from the infrastructure, and so on, and to collect them, and after when you are able to collect all this data, let's say in a consistent manner, after you can put your advanced tool to run some analytics, machine learning, and so on. So, but today it's true that's not so obvious to collect data from a radio access part, from infrastructure, for core network, for OSS, BSS. So we have also internal challenges within our organization to share all the data coming from the various sources and to let, let's say, anyone to put its tools to analyze it and so on. And you can also have some tools that can be used after for the service orchestration, to react and so on. But we are not yet there. We have, as said Javier, first layer by layer to be sure that the infrastructure is working fine, be able to put some onboarding VNF as automated as much as possible. After, we'll try to put some machine learning, analytics tool and so on, but step by step.
Yeah, I would like to add something on that, by the way. Yeah. It's about the data, because I fully agree with you. Sometimes less data is better. No, I'll tell you what. For years we were running campaigns of traffic analysis and prediction for planning and all that. Sometimes we discovered that less is more. I mean, if you have what you need is not many tabs everywhere, but having a sound strategy on what the data that you are collecting and how.
But how do you know which is the right data?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question, but actually it's the data that you have any decent chance to correlate, and that correlation is not spurious. That is the definition. And most of the data that you are hearing in a conference like this is impossible to correlate after. Okay, so the situation...
So we need to correlate it in real time. We need to analyze it in real time. We need to analyze it closer to, you know, the network.
That is the point. And I think that most of the things that we are hitting are not connecting the dots yet. So but they will connect them in 5 years.
In 5 years, I agree.
Maybe now they are discovering that there is some data that probably will be interested. In 5 years, they will be talking about correlation. Now we are talking about automation.
Maybe if you're talking about the end state of the network, maybe a slightly different perspective or a slightly different point of view. If we step back a little bit from technology here, right? There is a change in how end users perceive value, and it's evident if you look at Netflix, if you look at Amazon, if you look at Google, and the change in value is the value end users provide is in the experience, and it's the experience that matters, which means you gotta focus on the needs and automate the means, and that's where we need to get networking to. The consumption model needs to change, and how we consume the network, which means that it needs to be application aware, it needs to be highly agile, it needs to have the right data, less or more, I don't know. If I look at my social media, yes, sometimes less data is better. I don't want to see things that I see on Facebook.
I was by the way, the more the better.
So I think it's all about that consumption model and reducing the gap between application and network that has existed, both in the data center and the WAN. That's sort of the end game we got to aim for 5 years from now, when we are back in this panel with lesser hair and...
Exactly.
Yes.
If I've got any left. We'll have to draw it to a close there. I'm really sorry because it's getting more and more lively, but we are out of time. So I'd just like to say to you all, thank you very, very much for being here. Again, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.